Terrifying native legends, 3 Cherokee stories of the forbidden lands. They showed you because you were ready. Those were the words of an elder after that terrifying night when we witnessed strange lights in the sky. Who were they, and what did ready mean? The answer awaits your discovery. Subscribe to Histories and Native Tales to uncover untold stories of indigenous history and spirituality. Deep in North Carolina's National Forest, far from marked trails and tourist cabins, ancient hemlocks guard secrets passed down through generations of Cherokee families. Here, where wilderness remains truly wild, a small community maintains traditions unchanged by time. Each dawn, elders scatter sacred cornmeal along forest boundaries, their prayers rising with morning mist. Young ones learn early. The woods live and breathe, hosting spirits both benevolent and dangerous. Take only what you need, the elders teach. Leave offerings before entering. Stay on known paths. These aren't mere superstitions, but wisdom earned through centuries of coexistence with forces beyond human understanding. In one section of the forest where sunlight struggles to pierce the canopy, ancient hemlocks tower 200 feet skyward. Their branches weave so tightly that noon dims to perpetual twilight below. The Cherokee call this place the Dark Woods, a name earned by more than just its shadows. Stories trace back through generations, telling of those who entered and emerged changed. Some never emerged at all. 7 lightning-struck trees mark its boundary, their trunks blackened and twisted into unnatural shapes. Beyond them, the forest grows different, darker, older, alive in ways that defy explanation. Most community members avoid this place, crossing themselves when passing the scarred sentinel trees. But youth rarely heeds ancient warnings. 5 teenagers, 3 from the Cherokee community, 2 from the nearby town, crossed that boundary one summer day. The forest marked its territory clearly, yet they stepped past the lightning-scarred trees with the casual confidence of those too young to know better. Your grandparents just want to keep us away from their secret places, one town boy said, kicking at fallen leaves. All these stories about spirits and dangerous woods, they probably just want to keep people from finding old artifacts or something. The change came instantly. Mid-sentence, every forest sound ceased. No birds called their evening songs. No insects chirped their summer chorus. No leaves rustled in the branches above. The sudden silence pressed against their eardrums like physical pressure, making them swallow repeatedly to ease the sensation. Even their footsteps seemed wrong, muffled and distant, as if the ground itself absorbed the sound. The air grew thick and heavy, summer heat vanishing into unexpected cold that left their breath visible in pale clouds. 30 minutes of walking left them hopelessly disoriented. Every tree looked identical to the last, bark patterns repeating impossibly across different trunks. The trail behind them vanished with each step, replaced by more trees that seemed to spring from the earth itself when no one was looking directly at them. "We should have marked our path," one Cherokee boy muttered, running his hand along a trunk that felt wrong under his fingers, too smooth, too cold. "I did," his cousin replied, voice tight with tension. "I've been breaking branches every few feet. Look," he pointed behind them, where unbroken branches swayed gently despite the lack of wind. No markers remained. The forest had erased their passage as thoroughly as water erases footprints from sand. Their attempts to retrace their steps led only deeper into darkness. The canopy above grew denser with each passing minute, until the difference between cloud shadow and leaf shadow became meaningless in the perpetual twilight. The forest seemed to shift around them, paths appearing and disappearing, trees moving when viewed from the corner of the eye. Then they found the clearing. Perfect in its circularity, unnaturally empty of undergrowth, the space opened before them like a held breath in the forest's darkness. At its center stood a stone circle, 12 monoliths half buried in black earth that seemed to drink in what little light reached the forest floor. Ancient symbols covered the stones, spiraling patterns that drew the eye and held it, seeming to move when looked at too long. The air grew thicker here, pressing down on their shoulders like physical weight. Moving through it felt like wading through deep water. Then came the whispers, not from any single direction, but from everywhere at once. Words in an unknown language floated just at the edge of hearing, like a conversation happening underwater, maddeningly close to comprehension. The youngest boy stepped forward, his movements strange and mechanical. His eyes glazed over, reflecting nothing. No recognition showed on his face when the others called his name. He walked toward the stones as if pulled by invisible threads. "The old ones speak," he whispered in Cherokee, his voice hollow and distant, belonging to something older than his 15 years. "They guard this place. They want us to see." His skin had grown pale, lips tinged blue despite the summer heat. His cousin grabbed his arm to pull him back, then recoiled with a sharp cry. The boy's skin felt like ice, radiating cold that penetrated to the bone. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, though still incomprehensible to human ears. When they turned from the stone circle, they found their entrance gone. Trees pressed together in an unbroken wall, their trunks twisted and melded in ways that defied nature. Every direction offered the same view. More trees, more darkness, no escape. The forest had sealed them in. Hours of wandering left them exhausted and desperate. Their small supply of trail mix and water bottles seemed inadequate in the face of this endless maze. The whispers continued, always just out of reach, seeming to guide them deeper into the woods rather than toward escape. As darkness fell, the forest transformed again. Shadows deepened from black to something darker, something that seemed to swallow their flashlight beams. They made camp in a grove of ancient trees, their trunks twisted into shapes that suggested human forms when seen from the corner of the eye. None wanted to sleep, but exhaustion won out. Above them, branches wove together so tightly that even starlight couldn't penetrate. The temperature dropped steadily until their breath frosted in the air, an impossible cold for an August night in North Carolina. In the darkness, shapes moved at the edge of their campsite. Tall, thin figures drifted between trees, visible only in peripheral vision, vanishing when looked at directly. The whispers grew stronger, more urgent, almost but never quite resolving into understandable speech. Through the long night, they huddled together, watching twisted branches overhead shift and change position each time they blinked. The darkness pressed against them like a living thing, and in that darkness something watched, something waited. The whispers never ceased. Each time exhaustion pulled one of them toward sleep, the whispers would surge, pulling them back to wakefulness with words that scraped at the edges of understanding. The forest seemed to breathe around them, its rhythm growing slower and deeper as the night wore on. With each breath, the trees pressed closer, the darkness grew thicker, and the presence of something ancient and other became more undeniable. Through the night, shadows danced at the edge of their campfire. Tall, impossibly thin figures moved between ancient trunks, their forms barely distinguishable from the darkness. One boy lay awake, breath held, watching these shapes drift closer with each passing hour. His fingers dug into the earth, heart thundering against his ribs. The others needed rest, better to let them sleep than share this terror. Dawn brought empty space where their friend should have been. His sleeping bag lay undisturbed, dew collecting on the fabric as if he'd never been there at all. No footprints led away from camp. No branches broke to mark a path. "Marcus!" Their calls echoed strangely, muffled by the dense canopy. "Marcus!" Nothing answered but their own voices, distorted and wrong. They searched in widening circles around the camp. Each step took them deeper into the twisted forest. Trees pressed closer, their bark black and slick with morning dew. The air grew colder with each passing hour, their breath fogging despite the August heat. Footsteps followed them. Not the solid crunch of human feet on forest floor, but something lighter, quicker, always just behind, always vanishing when they turned. Branches snapped in their wake, though nothing visible moved among the trees. "Did you see that?" The youngest boy froze, pointing into the shadows. But there was nothing there. There was never anything there, only the certainty that something watched, waited, followed. 3 days stretched endless in the twisted forest. Their water ran out on the second day. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. The boy who had fallen into trance at the stone circle grew increasingly distant, his eyes glazed and unfocused. "We have to go back," he whispered, voice hoarse. His words carried an edge of something ancient, something that didn't belong to him. The circle, it's calling, it's the only way. The stones drew them back like iron to a lodestone. The clearing had changed, or perhaps their eyes had changed. The monoliths stood taller now, their carvings deeper, more distinct. Symbols writhed across the black stone surface, like living things. The entranced boy approached the circle with mechanical steps, his knees bent, body folding forward in genuflection before the ancient stones. Arms stretched toward the carvings, fingers trembling as they traced patterns in the air. The others hung back, muscles tight with fear. Beyond the circle, a figure emerged from the forest shadows. It stood impossibly tall, its form wrapped in darkness that moved and shifted like smoke. No features marked what might have been its face, only deeper shadow, endless and hungry. Primal terror broke their paralysis. They grabbed their friend's arms, dragged him from his prostration. His skin burned cold through his clothes, and words in an unknown tongue spilled from his lips. They ran. Hours blurred into a nightmare of branches whipping their faces, roots catching their feet. Then sunlight struck their eyes, real sunlight, warm and bright. A gravel road stretched before them. They collapsed on its shoulder, lungs burning, minds reeling from the sudden transition. Marcus was never found. Search parties combed the forest for weeks. Dogs lost his scent at the campsite. Helicopters found nothing but unbroken canopy. The authorities wrote it off as a hiking accident. Another careless teenager lost to the wilderness. The boy who had knelt before the stones withdrew from the world. He sat in darkened rooms, whispering in a language no one recognized. His family would wake to find him standing in their yard at night, staring into the forest, swaying to rhythms only he could hear. 10 years passed. He left the mountains, moved to crowded cities where trees grew in orderly rows. But distance brought no peace. In his small apartment, he still traced symbols in the air with trembling fingers. The ancient words still spilled from his lips in darkness. The others kept to marked trails after that. They scattered cornmeal at forest edges, whispered prayers before entering the woods. The old stories weren't just stories anymore. They were warnings, earned in blood and terror, about things that lived in the deep woods, things that waited in shadows, things that remembered when the mountains were young. At night, when wind moves through old trees and branches creak like footsteps, they remember. They remember the silence, the cold, the shadows that moved wrong. They remember the figure beyond the stone circle, too tall to be human, wrapped in darkness that breathed. Most of all, they remember that the forest keeps its secrets, and some mysteries are better left unexplored. Among the Cherokee people, tales of Uktana echo through generations. This great serpent, they say, prowls mountain forests guarding sacred places, its scales gleaming like rain on stone, its gaze powerful enough to strike a man dead. Elders insist Uktana is no mere myth, but a warning of forces beyond human understanding. Yet young minds often dismiss such warnings as simple stories, until they encounter something that shatters their disbelief. One summer morning, 2 cousins ventured into the Appalachian wilderness. The older one, eager for adventure, convinced his hesitant companion to explore a forbidden section of forest. Ancient warnings echoed in the younger's mind, tales of spirits, of creatures that roamed these woods. His cousin dismissed these concerns with casual laughter. "Just old stories to keep kids from wandering too far," he said, shouldering his pack. "Come on, where's your sense of adventure?" Dawn mist still clung to the trees as they set out. Their path, barely visible among dense undergrowth, quickly led them away from marked trails. With each step deeper into the forest, sounds began to fade. First the distant highway noise, then closer natural sounds, birdsong, insect chirps, leaf rustle. Soon only their bootfalls broke the thickening silence. The younger cousin's unease grew as shadows deepened around them. Despite the morning sun climbing overhead, light struggled to penetrate the dense canopy. His companion maintained a steady stream of jokes, but his voice seemed to fall flat in the heavy air. Hours passed before they reached their destination, a remote section where the forest felt fundamentally different. Ancient trees stood like sentinels, their bark dark and twisted into unnatural patterns. The air hung thick and heavy, pressing against their skin like a physical presence. The forest's strange atmosphere intensified as they discovered remnants of an old settlement. Stone foundations emerged from the earth, half-buried and overgrown. Moss-covered rocks formed patterns too regular to be natural. Ancient roots wrapped around what might once have been walls. "This isn't on any map," the younger cousin whispered, recognition dawning. "This is one of the old places, from before the removal, before they took our land." His companion paid no heed, kicking loose stones and joking about ghost stories. His laughter echoed wrongly against the ancient stones. Then came the sound, movement through the trees, too deliberate for wildlife. It circled their position, maintaining constant distance, always just out of sight. The younger cousin's heart pounded against his ribs as he called out a warning. "We need to go. Now." But his words fell on deaf ears. His companion continued exploring, unaware or unconcerned as the forest's temperature plummeted. Summer heat gave way to inexplicable cold. The air crackled with strange energy, raising hair on arms and necks. Without warning, the older cousin fell silent. He stood motionless before what appeared to be an altar stone, back rigid, arms hanging loose. No response came when his name was called. His skin had gone pale as winter frost, slight tremors running through his frame. The moment his cousin grabbed his arm, ice seemed to flow between them, bone-deep cold that burned like frostbite. Then they saw it. Beyond the altar stone, between ancient trunks, stood a figure that defied natural law. It towered impossibly tall, its form wrapped in living shadow. Where a face should have been, only deeper darkness gazed back at them. Terror broke the older cousin's trance. With a gasping cry, his eyes cleared, showing raw fear. No words were needed. They ran, crashing through undergrowth, until familiar ground spread beneath their feet. The adventure-seeker collapsed at the forest's edge, body shaking uncontrollably. "Never again," he gasped between ragged breaths. "Never going back." These were his last words about that day. The experience changed him fundamentally. The boy who once laughed at old stories grew quiet, withdrawn. He jumped at shadows and whispered prayers before entering even well-lit woods. Within a year, he moved away from the mountains, seeking refuge in cities where trees grew in ordered rows. His cousin brought the story to their grandfather, who listened with knowing eyes. "You met the Nuneihai," the elder said softly. "The spirit people. They guard sacred places, protect old powers. That land remembers when our ancestors walked there, before the removal. The spirits remember too. They don't welcome trespassers." Years have passed. Messages between cousins grow rare, and when they come, they never mention that day. Some experiences carve themselves too deep for words. In the deep woods, where ancient trees grow thick and shadows move against the sun's path, the Nuneihai still guard their sacred grounds. They stand as reminders that, whether the beings encountered that day were truly the Nuneihai remains uncertain. The forest holds many mysteries, ancient presences that predate human memory and will endure long after. The land carries these memories in its depths, teaching harsh lessons to those who fail to show proper respect. After the encounter, the younger cousins approach the forest differently. Their steps follow marked trails now, never straying into deeper shadows. Each visit begins with offerings, cornmeal scattered at the forest's edge, tobacco placed beneath ancient trees. These aren't mere gestures, but acknowledgments of a fundamental truth. This land never belonged to humans. They remain visitors on ancient ground. The old stories, passed down through generations of Cherokee people, carry more than entertainment or simple moral lessons. They are warnings, hard-earned wisdom from those who understood the land's true nature. When the forest falls silent, when cold seeps through summer air, when shadows move against the sun, these moments demand attention and respect. Deep in North Carolina's mountains, where Cherokee families have lived for countless generations, these truths persist despite modern skepticism. Even among their own people, some dismiss the old tales as superstition, refusing to believe in things they cannot explain. But the forest doesn't require belief to enforce its ancient laws. Years passed, and another tale emerged from these sacred woods. Late one summer evening, as autumn's first breath touched the mountains, a group gathered around a campfire deep in ancestral forests. Miles from tourist trails, in a clearing passed down through generations, they shared stories beneath stars that seemed unusually bright. Talk turned to the Anyunwia, the star people. Most greeted these tales with casual laughter, but one young man remained silent, his eyes reflecting firelight as others joked. When he finally spoke, his quiet words carried unusual weight. "I've seen them," he said simply, "out here, lights in the sky that moved like nothing else. His voice held no fear, only reverence, as if speaking of something sacred. Though others tried to laugh it off, something in his tone made them pause. The way he spoke, not trying to convince, simply stating truth, sent subtle shivers through his listeners. As night deepened and the fire burned low, an unnatural stillness descended. The constant symphony of cricket song fell silent. Wind died completely, leaving leaves frozen in place. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. The quiet man suddenly sat upright, finger pointing skyward. Others followed his gaze to find the familiar star field transformed. Among the fixed points of light, something moved with deliberate purpose. A single star drifted across the black expanse, its movement controlled and precise. Unlike planes or satellites, it produced no flashing lights, no contrail, no sound. It glided as if searching, intent evident in its path. The group watched in stunned silence as the light stopped abruptly, hanging motionless against the backdrop of normal stars. Then a second light emerged, and a third, each matching the first's eerie, deliberate movement. They formed a perfect triangle in the night sky, their precision suggesting conscious intent. No one moved, no one spoke. Every eye remained fixed on the impossible display above. These weren't the random drifting of satellites or the predictable paths of aircraft. The lights moved with purpose, as if alive, as if watching. Their dance across the starfield carried meaning just beyond human comprehension. Then as one they accelerated. Without warning, without dimming or fading, they shot off in different directions. Their speed defied physics, faster than any human craft, vanishing instantly into the vast darkness. One moment they dominated the sky, the next they simply ceased to exist. In the silence that followed, the air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on the watchers like a physical weight. The darkness between remaining stars seemed deeper, more alive. For long moments, no one moved or spoke, too stunned by what they'd witnessed. The quiet cousin finally broke the silence. "They're here," he whispered, voice carrying absolute certainty. Those simple words echoed with layers of meaning, connecting present moment to ancient wisdom. Though others might not have understood exactly what he meant, they felt the truth of it in their bones. That night changed how they understood their grandfather's words about the Anyunwia. "You'll see them when the time is right," he'd always said. Those weren't just comforting stories or metaphors. They were preparation for moments when ancient truth revealed itself to those ready to witness it. That night, an ancient presence surrounded the camp, not malevolent but undeniably powerful, a weight that pressed against their minds and bodies. Sleep proved impossible. The group huddled around their dying fire, straining to hear anything in the unnatural silence that blanketed the forest. Dawn brought no answers, only a deep certainty that they needed to leave. They packed in silence, each lost in private thoughts about what they'd witnessed. This wasn't fear driving them away, but a bone-deep understanding that they had glimpsed something beyond their world. Back home, the experience met with familiar skepticism. A mother's indulgent smile, treating it as just another campfire tale. But the grandfather's reaction proved different. He simply nodded, eyes knowing, and said, "They showed you because you're ready." Those words carried weight that chilled the spine. Questions multiplied. Was this meant to happen? Did it connect to their heritage, their ancestral bond with land and sky? Some answers might be better left undiscovered. Many forest visits followed that night, but the lights never reappeared. Perhaps the star people choose their moments carefully, appearing only when time and witness align properly. The experience defied modern UFO terminology. No flying saucers or alien spacecraft could capture its essence. This was something deeper, a force woven into the fabric of land and sky. The ancestors knew truths modern minds struggle to grasp. Stars hold more than distant light. They harbor watchers who occasionally remind us we're not alone in our observations. On quiet nights in deep woods, when air grows heavy and skin prickles with awareness, look skyward. You might witness something beyond explanation. If that moment comes, remember, balance curiosity with respect. The star people's presence spans ages. They don't exist for human understanding or entertainment. We simply share space in their ancient realm. The answer awaits your discovery. Subscribe to Histories and Native Tales to uncover untold stories of indigenous history and spirituality.